Hey everyone, I chose to read Mayflower, A Story of Courage, Community, and War by Nathaniel Thilbrick, which was published in 2007 by Penguin Group. When we hear the word Mayflower, most of us think of the ship which brought the Pilgrims to America. Although this is true, Mayflower, A Story of Courage, Community, and War by Nathaniel Thilbrick tells a different story. Thilbrick depicts a miserable 10-week journey for the 102 passengers aboard the vessel on their way to the New World in search of religious freedom. Thilbrick treks the timeline and recounts the many struggles and hardships over a period of 55 years in the founding of Plymouth Plantation and the battles between the English settlers and Native Americans. The book opens with the passengers aboard the historical Mayflower. To say the least, the conditions were not ideal. The passengers traveled between the decks in a space of about 75 feet long and less than 5 feet in height. The cabins were small, dank, and airless, which overflowed with their possessions. The departure had been scheduled for the summer of 1620, but the journey was delayed, and the Mayflower departed on September 6, 1620. The 102 passengers included 74 men and 28 women from both the separatists of the leading congregation and non-separatist passengers. The 37 laden separatists became known as the Pilgrims. While still aboard the Mayflower, Pastor John Robinson proposed that a civil covenant which could combine them into a civil body politic be adopted. This document became known as the Mayflower Compact. John Carver was appointed their governor. Rough waters and gale-force winds blew the ship 500 miles off course. On December 21, 1620, the Mayflower dropped anchor at Plymouth Harbor. The land was unpopulated. Thilbrick's historical narrative covers the 55 years after the Pilgrims set foot on the well-known Plymouth Rock for the first Thanksgiving to the end of King Philip's War. The author says that the first few weeks were spent building a shelter, since the Mayflower would be returning to England. The weeks which followed were difficult, and many became very sick and died. In order to survive in the new land, the Pilgrims formed an alliance with the nearest Native American tribe, the Wampanoags, led by Massasoit. This alliance would ensure the survival of Massasoit's people who had become victims of diseases introduced by European explorers. Thilbrick surmised that 90% of the region's inhabitants were dead by the time the Pilgrims arrived. Squanto, Massasoit's advisor, was key in showing the Pilgrims how to plant corn and hunt wildlife. Squanto negotiated a peace treaty that would ensure the Pilgrims and the Wampanoags would support each other in the event of an attack from other Native American tribes. This alliance would last until the death of Massasoit in 1661. After the death of Massasoit, his son, Metacom, also known as King Philip, became the Wampanoag leader. King Philip promised that the ancient covenant made between his father and the Pilgrims would be honored. As the text states, King Philip was resolved to hold on to the land of his people, but by the year 1675, there were 76 deeds registered in Plymouth courts. As the colonists continued to acquire land, the Wampanoags had no choice but to push back. In the spring of 1676, the Wampanoags attacked the English settlement in Sudbury, Massachusetts. This event set off King Philip's War. The war raged between the colonists and the Wampanoags until August 12, 1676, when Philip was killed. The ship Mayflower represents the transportation of a diverse group of passengers who traveled over 3,000 miles in search of a better place to live and freely worship as they chose. Thilbrick's Mayflower, A Story of Courage, Community, and War, presents an in-depth look into the lives of those who made that great voyage in the year of 1620. Since the publication date of Mayflower, A Story of Courage, Community, and War, society has deemed it inappropriate to refer to the indigenous people as Indians. It is more politically correct to refer to them as Native Americans. Nonetheless, Thilbrick's Mayflower allows the reader to take a more in-depth look into the events that shaped the early colonies of our great country. I read this entire book, cover to cover, every word on every page. Nathaniel Thilbrick has written a captivating historical narrative of the extraordinary journey of brave men and women who endured many struggles and hardships in search of religious freedom. I found it intriguing and difficult to put the book down. The book is definitely more than a story of early colonization, but an insightful account of an important period in American history. Mayflower, A Story of Courage, Community, and War by Thilbrick follows 102 travel-weary passengers through a fateful first winter in 1620 of which 42 of the 102 passengers died. Thilbrick labeled the passengers saints and strangers. These labels were used to differentiate the separatists from the other passengers. The text says that Massasoit, chief of the Wampanoags, watched the Pilgrims the first winter. Massasoit was unsure how to react to the newcomers. Early sailors had killed many of his people with no provocation. This action caused Massasoit to attack and kill a group of explorers on Cape Cod where Squanto was taken hostage. These settlers were different from the other European fishermen and explorers. These people had brought women and children with them, and they kept to themselves instead of trying to trade with the Native Americans. In the spring of 1621, Squanto would be key in helping the Pilgrims plant crops and to form an alliance with Massasoit. Squanto negotiated a peace treaty that would ensure the Pilgrims and the Wampanoags would support each other in the event of an attack from other Native American tribes. This alliance would last until the death of Massasoit in 1661. As I read Mayflower, it is quite evident that the story of Pilgrims did not end with the story of the first Thanksgiving. This book covers 55 years of history from the famous landing at Plymouth Rock to King Philip's War and the death of the Wampanoags leader, Metacom, also known as Philip, in the spring of 1621. Thilbrick estimated that between 60 and 80% of the Native American population of southern New England was killed during King Philip's War. The remaining indigenous people were sold into slavery. Thilbrick ends his book with the death of King Philip, which also ended the war. Thilbrick gives perspectives from both Pilgrims and Native Americans. This gives a deeper understanding in the struggle for the people to keep their homeland and ways of life, and how disadvantaged people were driven to despair and desolation and finally annihilated. Ultimately, King Philip's greed resulted in loss of much of Wampanoag's land. Although Thilbrick's Mayflower factual-based book is easy to read, it has 358 pages of readable text. Nonetheless, the book is divided into sections and can be broken down into daily chapter reading. Assignments which enable teachers to create lesson plans appropriate for grades 8 through 12. I chose to create a lesson plan for a group of 10th graders. The lesson focus is to allow students to take a closer look into the relationship between the Pilgrims and the Native Americans in the New World. Also, students will identify the struggles faced by the Pilgrims and will develop an understanding of how the Wampanoags and the Pilgrims' survival depended on each other. Since the book is divided into 4 sections, discovery, accommodation, community, and war, I use these sections to assign group projects and to create a timeline of events in the 55 years covered in the book. As the students read the book, they will gather information of important dates, battles, and events in the lives of legendary characters such as William Bradford, Edward Winslow, Miles Standish, Massasoit, and Squanto. Students will take notes from the daily reading assignments. This information will be beneficial in creating a Prezi presentation timeline assignment. The groups will present their Prezi timeline to the whole class, and the group Prezis will be shared on YouTube. This lesson plan aligns with the Social Studies 10th grade Alabama course of study core standard to compare regional differences among early New England, middle, and southern colonies regarding economics, geography, culture, government, and American Indian relations. The Prezi timeline assignment aligns with the ISTE technology standards. Apply existing knowledge to generate new ideas, products, and processes, communicate information and ideas effectively to multiple audiences using a variety of media and formats, and locate, organize, evaluate, synthesize, and ethically use information from a variety of sources. I highly recommend Mayflower, a story of courage, community, and war. It is a phenomenal read and will be a great asset to a personal library and a great classroom resource. Thilbrick gathered much of his information from the writings of William Bradford, a leader of the Separatist congregation and author of Plymouth Plantation, which creates a factual historical novel. I give it a big thumbs up.